Sonic Adventure 2 is the sequel to Sonic Adventure, released in 2001 on the Sega Dreamcast to critical acclaim. Nowadays though, the consensus seems to be constantly shifting. I've heard countless people say that this game is not a worthy successor to Sonic Adventure, and that this is where the Sonic series started to falter. Having replayed all of the main stories with an open mind for this review, I don't quite agree with this ever-growing hatred for Sonic Adventure 2. In fact, I think this is the best Sonic has ever been in 3D, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. As always, in this review, I'll analyze the story, presentation, and gameplay, and discuss other significant subjects related to this game. So, without further ado, this is my review of Sonic Adventure 2. Like the first game, Sonic Adventure 2 offers different perspectives on the same story in the form of multiple single-player campaigns. However, what sets this game apart is how it presents these stories. In Sonic Adventure, there were 6 playable characters who all had their own playstyles and campaigns, and while the sequel does still have 6 playable characters, it's narrowed down the amount of playstyles to just 3. These have 2 characters each, one for the hero side and one for the dark side. Thus, you'll be experiencing all of the gameplay styles the game has to offer regardless of which story you choose. In the hero story, you'll be playing as Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, all returning from Sonic Adventure, while the Dark story features newcomers Shadow and Rouge, as well as allowing you to play as the series antagonist, Dr. Eggman, for the very first time. We'll talk about these different playstyles in due time, but first let's go over the story. Sonic is running away from the military because they believe that he's stolen a Chaos Emerald from the bank. In reality, this was the work of Shadow the Hedgehog, an old government experiment that Eggman has awakened to do his bidding. His goal this time around is to hold the entire planet hostage by threatening to blow it up with the Eclipse Cannon, another government experiment that was designed to be able to destroy entire planets. Sonic and friends set out to stop him once again. This plot is definitely a lot more ambitious and complicated than the previous game, but thankfully for the most part I think it's executed well. Much like Sonic Adventure, the sequel does a good job exploring the new characters and their motivations. There's a reason Shadow is such a fan favorite. He starts off being motivated by revenge, has a change of heart later on, and has a well-earned conclusion to his character arc at the end of the game. Now this alone wouldn't be all that groundbreaking for the series, but what sets Shadow apart from characters like Knuckles and Gamma is that his character development is much more gradual. You see him try to piece together his fragmented memories of his childhood friend Maria, who was killed, yes they killed a child in this game, right before Shadow was put into stasis. He's a very well developed character, and I think this is something that the game would have only been able to accomplish effectively through cutscenes and spoken dialogue. Without this, he could have very easily just been Knuckles all over again. Rouge can easily be viewed as shallow when compared to Shadow, but despite Sonic Team clearly having certain priorities, Rouge is still decently characterized in this game. At first she's suggested to be nothing more than a jewel thief archetype, but is later revealed to be a government spy researching Project Shadow. She gets a lot of good dialogue exchanges, especially with Eggman, Shadow, and of course Knuckles. As for the returning characters, any development they had in Sonic Adventure was carried over into this game. Tails is much more brave and ready at any moment to take action when Sonic needs him, and Knuckles has learned to be more wary about being tricked. Dr. Eggman as well as Sonic himself continue to be their static selves from the classics, and it works just as well here as it ever has. Eggman hits the perfect balance between goofy and sinister, and Sonic evens out his brash attitude with his compassion for others. When it comes to the plot itself, I must admit it does get a little convoluted toward the end, and I'm aware that this may alienate some players. Even with that said though, if you're able to keep up with the average Avengers movie, you shouldn't have much trouble here. Even if some of the details go over your head, the game still keeps its priorities straight and always places emphasis on context that is most important to the gameplay. The cutscenes are massively improved from Sonic Adventure, with better facial animation, more dynamic shot composition, faster pacing, and much better sound mixing. With that said, I do have my nitpicks. Firstly, these cutscenes seem to use motion capture for some reason. I'm not trying to completely write off mocap as a method of animation or anything, but I really don't think it suits these cartoonishly proportioned characters whatsoever. Sonic and company often look like they're in mascot costumes, and it's definitely something that takes some getting used to. This really makes their cutscenes more of a product of their time than anything, so I don't fully blame Sonic Team, but rather the animation industry for pushing mocap so hard in areas it really didn't belong. My other nitpick is that the quality seems to decline in the final story. Characters interrupt each other, there's weird awkward pauses, and the translation is just off sometimes. Many of these problems would be exacerbated in the GameCube port, but we'll talk about that in the Modern SD episode. Stay tuned. Generally, Sonic Adventure 2 is a very good looking game by 2001 standards, with unusually high resolution textures for the time, as well as character models that more accurately represent Yuji Uekawa's promotional artwork. The sound design is also much improved from its predecessor. The sound that enemies make when they explode is super satisfying now. Like the cutscenes though, I do still think there was room for improvement here. Some levels try to have ambient sounds, such as dripping water in Aquatic Mine and jets flying by in Mission Street. While a cool idea, these sounds are way too loud and don't seem to have any randomized pitch, so they just sound weird. Also, I'm not sure I like the lighting as much in this game. The environments are lively and well designed, but the characters are a lot less shiny than in their Adventure 1 counterparts. I suppose this comes down to taste, and you could even argue that this makes them look closer to their flat shaded 2D artwork, but personally I think I slightly prefer the more high contrast lighting from the first game. Despite all of these criticisms though, Sonic Adventure 2 still easily trounces its predecessor in terms of presentation. It's animated better for the most part, improves the sound design, and once again boasts a varied soundtrack that manages a good balance of vocal and instrumental songs. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to talk about gameplay. Sonic Adventure 2 makes quite a lot of changes from the first game. The most striking one when first starting the game will probably be its lack of any adventure fields, the hub worlds that had a constant presence in Sonic Adventure. These are completely gone, and they will be sorely missed. This was part of Sonic Team's goal to make the sequel more of a streamlined, action-packed experience. Aside from the game booting you into the Chao Garden if you collect a Chao Key, most of your time spent in Sonic Adventure 2 will be playing action stage after action stage, with only cutscenes and boss fights to fill in the gaps. What prevents this from making the game repetitive and boring is the new way it structures its campaigns. As I alluded to earlier, Sonic Adventure 2 has you playing as different characters throughout each story, as opposed to the first game's approach, which gave you the option of going through each character's campaign one at a time. Detractors of this game seem to believe that this makes the pacing worse than the first game, which I wholeheartedly disagree with. Instead of having you play as Sonic for several hours and then throwing a few less developed campaigns at you, Sonic Adventure 2 is always switching the gameplay styles around to keep you invested. My one big nitpick with this new system is that the pacing could have been a little better. Instead of playing as Sonic for one stage, Tails for the next, then Knuckles, then Sonic again, the game will sometimes make you play more than one stage in a row as a particular character before moving on to the next one. This is particularly annoying with Knuckles and Rouge's levels, but more on that later. Sonic Adventure 2 also brings back the upgrade system from the first game, and it works fairly well in a normal any percent playthrough. However, it falls apart pretty quickly if you try to partake in the game's mission system due to these upgrades being hidden in random levels without giving you any hints as to where they are. This system worked fine in Adventure 1 because these Metroidvania-esque mechanics are fit for a large interconnected hub world, but the second game is comprised entirely of linear action stages, making backtracking for the upgrades much more tedious. With all of that out of the way, it's time to talk about the individual character playstyles. For these, I will once again be employing my three staples of Sonic excellence. Let's quickly recap what I'm looking for in an ideal Sonic gameplay style. 1. Essential Sonic staples should be present. These include rings, springs, robotic enemies, etc. 2. Replayability should be encouraged through design. A good Sonic playstyle should have a high skill ceiling for mastering the character's moveset and/or challenging levels that become more fun the more you play them. And finally, 3. The character's central attributes should be important. By central attribute, I mean the core of the character's design. For example, Sonic is a hedgehog, so his gameplay should place emphasis on his ability to roll into a ball. With these in mind, let's get into it. Sonic and Shadow's gameplay is very similar to Sonic from Adventure 1, albeit with some changes and improvements. As expected then, these fill the three requirements perfectly. Essential Sonic staples are present, the levels are replayable as ever with a satisfying moveset to master, and Sonic's ability to roll into a ball is properly utilized for the most part. Tragically, although Sonic Adventure 2 does add the roll to Sonic's moveset, it works nothing like how it does in the classic games. All of your momentum is halted when you use this move, and it's only used to roll under specific crevices. Thankfully, the spin dash is still here, but I still would have liked to be able to put Sonic and Shadow into a ball state while running. Despite this, Sonic and Shadow still feel much better to play than in the first Sonic adventure, and this is the result of a myriad of small tweaks and changes that add up to a more polished experience. The Lightspeed Dash, a move from the first game that would zip Sonic across trails of rings, returns in Sonic Adventure 2, but this time you can simply press the button without having to charge it up. There's also new upgrades, such as the Bounce Bracelet, which functions similarly to the Butt Bounce from Pac-Man World. Pressing the action button dribbles Sonic like a basketball, helping you gain height to clear larger gaps or drop onto rails faster and more reliably. Now, all of these changes are fantastic, and I want to make it crystal clear that this is indeed the best 3D Sonic we've ever had in my opinion. With that said, I do still think there was room for improvement here. All of your special moves are mapped to the same button, meaning you might accidentally do the wrong move when trying to do the lightspeed dash. I had this issue constantly in Sonic's levels, though weirdly it didn't seem to happen nearly as often in Shadow's stages. Speaking of Shadow, while I think he controls just as well as Sonic, I do wish he also had the bounce bracelet. It would have added so much more depth to his levels, especially ones like Radical Highway or Skyrail that have a lot of rails to grind on. That's the big new thing in this game, rail grinding. Sonic played some Tony Hawk, thought it was cool, and decided to copy his moves. Surprisingly, this is one of the most satisfying mechanics to master in Sonic Adventure 2. It doesn't work like the modern Sonic games where you're constantly moving along the rail and only have to worry about switching lanes. Instead, you have to balance to keep Sonic or Shadow from falling off, and crouch on downward slopes to increase your momentum. Despite seeming like such a foreign concept to the Sonic series up to this point, rail grinding in Sonic Adventure 2 feels like a natural extension of the Sonic gameplay style, and I think this is due to its focus on maintaining momentum. It feels spiritually tied to the classic games, which also use momentum in a similar fashion. Rail grinding just puts a different spin on the exact same design philosophy, and that's really quite genius when you think about it. In general, I think the Sonic and Shadow levels feel like the logical next step for Sonic's gameplay. I've heard people argue that Sonic Adventure 2's stages are more linear, but I really don't think these detractors understand the actual meaning of the word linear. The more linear a level in a video game is, the less options you have to traverse through said level, forcing you into a straight line. Sonic Adventure 2 is not more linear than Sonic Adventure. It has just as many, if not more, branching paths and alternate routes through every stage. Of course, it's impossible to deny that this game's levels are more narrow and less spacious than its predecessor's stages, but that doesn't mean that they're more linear, it just means that there's less empty space. Adventure 2's stages are more streamlined versions of what we got in the first game, nothing more. Overall, Sonic and Shadow's levels are a great example of how to expand and improve upon a Sonic gameplay style, while still retaining what made it great in the first place. Gamma in Sonic Adventure was an interesting idea backed up by a genuinely good story, and Sonic Adventure 2 expands on that idea with Tails and Eggman stages. These levels fill in requirements 1 and 2 perfectly, but what about number 3? Tails and Eggman are the only characters in this game that don't travel on foot, but rather inside big bulky mechs that can hover and shoot at objects and enemies. For Eggman, this makes perfect sense, due to his defining characteristic being that he's an evil genius who creates destructive machines. On the other hand, Tails is usually associated with his two tails that allow him to fly like a helicopter. This was utilized excellently in Sonic Adventure 1, but Sonic Adventure 2 puts Tails into a mech and never lets him get out, aside from the Chow Garden. When considering Tails for the 3 staples, I thought at first that this disqualified him from being a good Sonic gameplay style, but then I realized the genius at play here. Literally. Because think about it, besides his tails, what is Tails known for? His inventions, of course. He's always tinkering with his plane, the Tornado, along with other things such as artificial Chaos Emeralds as seen in this game. With this in mind, it makes perfect sense for Tails to have a mech like Eggman. He's an inventor too. Also, if Tails played like how he did in the first game, it'd not only be redundant since Sonic and Shadow already cover our classical bases, it'd also mean we wouldn't have this clever parallel of 2 scientific geniuses. One good, one evil. With that small tangent covered, let's talk about the actual gameplay of these levels. Just like Gamma in the first game, Tails and Eggman can hold the action button to start targeting multiple enemies and release it to blast them all at once. It's just as satisfying as it was in Sonic Adventure, if not even more. Though, don't play these stages if you're waiting for something to cook in the microwave, because the targeting sound will probably throw you off. What sets these stages apart from Gamma is that they're a little more slower paced, but also more thoughtfully designed. While I did like Gamma stages in Adventure 1, not only were they woefully short, they also often reused sections of Sonic's levels. On the other hand, Tails and Eggman stages in Sonic Adventure 2 are not only longer, but much more mechanically interesting. The hover is utilized more, there's more intensive platforming to balance the action, and later on the game will introduce hazards that you actually want to avoid shooting, preventing the player from just spamming the action button for the whole level. Honestly, despite not finding as much intrinsic thrill in these stages as I do with Sonic's, it's hard for me to find anything substantial to criticize in these levels. At worst, there might be some less than favorable camera angles or a tricky platforming section that might take more tries than I'd like, but overall these stages are surprisingly well fleshed out, and I gotta give credit where it's due. Sonic Team took an idea that was already great in the first game, and aside from the occasional early 2000s jank, made it the best it could reasonably be. I wish I could say the same about Knuckles and Rouge's levels. Once again, Knuckles is hunting for the pieces of the Master Emerald, but this time Rouge is trying to get to them before he can. These stages are similar to how they were in Sonic Adventure, meaning they fit requirements 1 and 3, but yet again I feel like requirement 2 isn't quite reached here. The biggest reason for this is that, for some reason that I will never understand, the radar will only detect one of the 3 emeralds you need to find at a time. This practically forces you to use hints, especially in the larger levels. My only guess as to why they did this is to make these stages last longer, but if that's the case, it's a terrible excuse. Even if Knuckles and Rouge had the radar from the first game, the sheer size and amount of levels would still make up a large portion of playtime. Ultimately, this just makes them more tedious than before. Despite this though, I don't think Knuckles and Rouge's levels are as bad as many seem to believe. While I will admit these stages are tedious at times, even with the less robust radar, they don't overstay their welcome as long as you use hints. The downside of this though is Sonic Adventure 2's brand new ranking system. This works wonders for replayability with Sonic, Shadow, Tails, and Eggman, but Knuckles and Rouge's levels fall apart here because the game will detract from your ranking if you use hints. This is downright criminal. Still, that's only if you're taking time to replay these levels. If you're just doing a regular 80% playthrough of Sonic Adventure 2, Knuckles and Rouge don't take too much playtime if you use hints, and despite the annoying radar system, hunting down the emerald shards is still decent fun if you can put up with the jank. Somehow, I completely forgot to talk about the bosses in my Sonic Adventure video, so here's a quick summary of my thoughts. They're not bad, but they're definitely too easy for the most part. I like that most of them follow the classic Sonic philosophy of landing as many hits as you can while the boss is vulnerable, but when most of these bosses only have a measly 3 hit points, that results in a laughably short battle. Sonic Adventure 2 remedies this problem, though not in the way I would have preferred. Instead of following up on the Genesis style bosses by giving them more hit points, Sonic Adventure 2 uses the more standardized approach of only allowing the player to hit the boss once when its weak point opens up. It's not a bad way of doing bosses. In fact, some of the fights in this game, such as the Egg Golem, are really solid, but I do feel like it missed an opportunity to properly bring the classic boss design approach into 3D. Also returning from the first game are character battles, where you fight another playable character from a different campaign. Much like the rest of the bosses, these were painfully easy in Adventure 1, but thankfully they amped up the difficulty a bit in Adventure 2, save for a few early battles. Generally, boss fights have never been a strong suit of the Sonic series, and unfortunately the adventure games are no exception. Despite this, I think Adventure 2 leans towards the better side of the spectrum, so it gets a passing grade here in my book. Spoiler alert, skip here if you don't want to see them. After defeating the hero in Dark Stories, you unlock the final story, where the 2 campaigns converge and the game comes to an end. Like I mentioned before, the cutscenes in this campaign are a bit messy, at least in the English dub, but the actual story told here is still quite good. The Space Colony arc is on a crash course for Earth, and Sonic, Shadow, Eggman, and the others have to stop it. This leads us to the most grueling challenge in the entire game: Cannon's Core. This level has you playing as each and every character in the game, save for Shadow, with the mission of getting to the core of the Space Colony's Eclipse Cannon and destroying it. This is brutal. If you get a game over, you have to start over from the very beginning of a 5-segment stage, so make sure to farm lives before you attempt it. Anyway, after this level, Shadow has a change of heart when Amy inadvertently unlocks one of his memories, and he's convinced to help Sonic with overcoming the final obstacle preventing them from their goal, the Bio Lizard. Sonic and Shadow use the Chaos Emeralds to transform into Super Sonic and Super Shadow, leading to the Final Hazard boss fight. Much like Perfect Chaos from Sonic Adventure, Final Hazard isn't an especially difficult battle, instead focusing on cinematic spectacle, and this is a tradition that I absolutely love when it comes to early 3D Sonic games. Switching between Super Sonic and Super Shadow, hearing their dialogue, seeing them work together to destroy a common enemy, all while one of the best songs in the entire series is playing in the background, makes for a climactic final boss that rivals Perfect Chaos as one of the best in all of Sonic history. After defeating Final Hazard, Sonic and Shadow use Chaos Control to transport the Ark away from Earth. Shadow sacrifices himself in the process, fulfilling his promise to Maria as well as the entire world. The credits roll as all of the characters exchange dialogue, reminiscing on the long adventure they just had. The end. Sonic Adventure 2 is an excellent sequel that blends together a variety of playstyles to make a memorable and fun experience. But more importantly, in my opinion, it features the best 3D Sonic we have ever had. While we would get plenty of good video games featuring Sonic long after Adventure 2's time in the sun, Sonic Team still has yet to top what this game Sonic had to offer. A blend of classic conventions and 3D freedom, all experienced in tight, streamlined levels that are exhilarating to play and satisfying to master. And yet, even with all of this said, Sonic Adventure 2 still had so much room for improvement. It still has some jank left over from its predecessor, the cutscenes could have been better, and while Sonic here is the best he's ever been in 3D, he still can't roll into a ball on command, and he's still limited by 1998 hardware. All of this makes me sad that we never got a proper Sonic Adventure 3 that remedies these issues and adds even more interesting content and stories to enjoy. Despite this though, I am still very fond of Sonic Adventure 2. It's a memorable experience, an excellent sequel, and even with its few shortcomings, it still holds the title of my favorite Sonic game of all time. If you want more Sonic content, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because I've got videos about this game and more coming soon, showing you the best way to play and comparing it to Super Mario Sunshine. Stay tuned, thanks for watching, and as always, enjoy life.